Today I'm welcoming a guest to the podcast who I'm excited to have with me. It's a topic that I'm passionate about, and the reason why I started the podcast actually is to break down stigmas, stereotypes, and judgments around substance use and mental health challenges. I'm thrilled to welcome Jeff Hayward, author, facilitator, and accredited counselor, and the author of this book, Simple, I don't know what I can say, SHIT, for Complicated People. This book, Jeff was kind enough to mail this to me. As I started reading it, I was highlighting. It is written in a way that is easy to digest, especially for those of us who have lived experience. But I thought about it afterwards. Jeff, by the way, welcome. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me.
That's kind of a key piece to a podcast. Thank you for being here. I appreciate you taking the time.
My pleasure.
I also thought, what a great book for people to read who have not had lived experience, because it might actually, in simple language, make sense to them and kind of answer some of the questions that they've kind of struggled with as they try to understand their friends and family going through things. Agree?
Yeah, absolutely. There's a lot of different theory and context in there, but it is all simplified. And, part of the healing process for one individual contains all the family and support around them as well. So,
yeah, that's funny. I forgot to welcome you, but I did really genuinely want to welcome you, and I do welcome you. Thank you so much. I'm not going to edit that out because I think it's a natural indication of who I am as a person. So before we start talking about the book and the content of the book, I would love to know a little bit more about you and how you kind of came to this place of writing the book and working in this space related to substance use.
Sure. Yeah. So, I really believe that people get into this line of work for two reasons, and fundamentally only two reasons only. And that's to either help themselves or help somebody they love, right? Mm-hmm. For me, that was to help myself. It was to figure out myself. I have a lived experience, and when I left a treatment program, I didn't know what to do. And I know that I was confused and directionless and, suffered from this condition, don't know if it's going to continue suffering. And so, very, very mixed thoughts. And I started studying, went to school for addiction counseling, thinking that this will help me.
Okay.
And at the same time, I was working on the downtown east side in different shelter and housing programs. Then I started working in treatment. So I really had like two different worlds of context to work with. And, at that point, not knowing where I was going to go, I continued to study because I got super interested and curious about the human condition and, why people are resorting to this suffering and potentially drawn to that kind of suffering, right? And, looking at everybody just as a person, whether they're, been on downtown east side for 20 years or whether they're living in their high rise in Yaletown, right? And I work to just create a collective message to whoever's reading it. And I've experienced that a lot when I'm talking to people as a counselor, as a facilitator. But yeah, continued to go to school, completed my master's degree about 5 years ago.
Okay.
And, I went into a different space the last 3 years, doing a lot of innovative and interesting work with government on different programs around the province. And I recently came back to this space because it felt right. It felt authentic. And, the only agenda that I wanted to be in front of me was the person that's wanting to heal. Mm-hmm. And, with the government space, you're working underneath and handcuffed to other people's agendas, right? So I started the book about 3 years ago, didn't touch it until the end of summer, and then put it off, and it's been out now for about 6 weeks.
Wow. So it is brand new. I was congratulating Jeff before we started recording because I don't know how many of you have written a book. I imagine very few. But maybe more than I think, but writing a book is a very huge feat. And lots of people think of it, they dream of it, they say, I'm going to do it one day, I'm going to do it. And it doesn't happen because it is a big, big job. What was the, what was the real motivator for you to say, you know what, I'm going to do this thing?
The real motivator for me, Rachel, was, you know, consolidating all the messages that I've been able to provide people that they have found effective, and really kind of spinning off from the normal doctrine and some of the complex scientific theory that's thrown at a lot of people that are suffering with this condition or want to understand it. So having that experience of being in that condition, working with all spectrums of people, I really enjoyed it, and it was really easy to write for me because the the writing is what I have conversations with about every day with people, and that was the easy part. The hard part was actually understanding how to put together a book that I can mail to people like you, and people can purchase and read. And I think the book really also has a lot of symbolism behind it in terms of healing and recovery, right? And it's a very sincere therapeutic process to sit down, take some space for yourself, and be in a quiet area where you can, absorb information and really reflect on your story. And I felt a lot of books were constructed on other people's story, other
Right.
people's journey. So my intention was for somebody to understand and create their own journey through the pages of the book.
Yeah, as I was reading it, I was highlighting various sections that resonated with me, which will come up in the questions. But it was, I don't want to say it was an easy read because easy is not the right word. But it was the kind of book that you wanted to continue reading because it was easily digestible and relatable to me with lived experience. And as I said earlier, I think would be really helpful also for those who are, keen to understand why people would want to self-sabotage as they see
Mm.
those with lived experience doing, which essentially is what we are doing, but for reasons that we'll discuss. The medical labeling of substance use bothers you. It does me as well. Medical labeling bothers me in a lot of different spaces, including my son who has ADHD. And you say in the book that those using substances are, and I'll say, quote here, hijacked by short term survival needs instead of long term meaning. And you also describe substance use being messy systems of survival that have kind of worked until they didn't. And that was, that hit home for sure. Um, it really does work until it does not work. And then it's bad. And then it's like it works so well. And then it's works so not well that it is unbelievable, the transition. Can you speak to that line of thinking around those
Sure.
kind of two quotes?
Yeah, and I agree with you. The main problem with substances is that they work really, really, really good, right? And
Yeah.
we're not designed to control our feelings as human, but we found these mechanisms in substances to do so, right? Um, the condition, as I say to it, and just to come back to like the terminology there, right? Like, I don't really think there's a fundamental or a universal term for it. You know, different sectors use different vernacular on how they describe it.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, some people call an illness. We have the disease model, which is the 12-step model, right? Um, we have the substance use disorder language, which, I would be closest to if we're talking textbook, right? But a substance use disorder, and if you look at the word disorder, all it means is a disruption, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's a disruption. It's a disruption in thought. It's a disruption in behavior. And, I think we latch onto it. And the word addiction, too, has become really like it's lost its teeth, right? A lot of people will go out there and say, I'm addicted to Costco now, or I'm addicted to, the new Starbucks frappe, or whatever it might be, right? So I think it's really lost its teeth.
Yeah.
And I wanted to bring like kind of some further layers to it, right? Because people that are suffering, you know, they resist that term addiction. They resist that label, and they should, right? But then they land in it. And I think there's an opportunity to really approach the problematic use before it becomes a chronic dependency, right?
Mm-hmm.
And why I call it a condition mainly is because conditions change, right? Weather conditions change, financial conditions change,
Mm-hmm.
relationship conditions change. So to put a real, label that kind of insinuates and feels like you're attached to it without no end, um, I struggle to really buy into that, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because it used to be just black and white. You have an addiction or you don't have an addiction. And I can tell you from my experience, you know, the visible use of substances that we have right now in Vancouver and Surrey and wherever we are, there's lots of visibility behind substance use, right? And you might see somebody unhoused and using a substance on the sidewalk, right?
Mm-hmm.
I tell you that for every person you see like that, there are a dozen more that are suffering in their home. There
Yeah.
are a dozen more that their career is suffering. And, I think we focus on what's visible, right?
Mm-hmm.
You know, when we look at it more of like a postmodern view, we layer it and we say, okay, so there's four layers to this now. Instead of black and white addiction, you have substance use at the top, where everybody uses substances, right? I drink coffee, I take medication, right? And just to clarify, like a substance is anything other than food that causes a physical or cognitive reaction, right?
Mm-hmm.
So or alters the mind or alters the body in some sort of way. So substance use, everybody uses substances. And under that, we have substance misuse. So that's using a substance for other than medical or ritual use, right? And ritual use, again, it's open to interpretation, but a lot of people go towards like ayahuasca in Peru as a ritual or something like that. But we have rituals in North America where people consume substances, right? Some people just smoke pot when they go to a concert. Some people have more than a few drinks every Monday night watching football, right?
Mm-hmm.
Some people just get a bag of cocaine on New Year's Eve, right? That's ritual for them. And it's
Yeah.
not, it's not misuse. But underneath misuse, we have problematic use. And that's when using a substance affects major life areas like your career, your finance, your health, mental, emotional, physical, your relationships, your family, right? So when we see somebody get into that problematic phase, it starts impacting these life areas. The challenge is that if it only impacts your relationship, but you still have money in the bank, your job's going well, your family is there and supportive, the appetite to step away from that problem is not really intense at that time.
Mm-hmm.
But it's when we see people's using affect all those life areas. Because below problematic use, we have chronic dependency, and that would be the equivalent to addiction, right? Where people are chronically dependent on it. But just because you're chronically dependent on it doesn't mean you can come into a different stage into it, right? And we see people come into treatment all the time that have that chronic dependency. Their whole brain, their pleasure center, everything is real hijacked, right? They come into treatment, they get a break from life. They start, a withdrawal process, right? Physical or cognitive, emotional, whatever that might be. And then during treatment, we attack those, the problems or the challenges that were created with family, the challenges that were created with work on goals. And then we bring somebody up, right? So that's, it's a lot more complex than just having addiction and not having addiction.
Yes, and it's also that as you're describing the stages, it's the thinking you can stop and then realizing actually you cannot stop.
Right.
You actually cannot even minimize the amount that you're consuming.
Exactly. Well, and stopping is much easier than staying stopped.
Mm. Mm. I guess that's true. Yeah, yeah, that's a good point. I used to get very frustrated when I would see people with 25 years because I would think to myself, you have nothing to offer me.
Hmm.
I'm in my first few months. You're 25 years without substances. You have no idea where I am right now. Bye bye.
Yeah.
I've since learned that there's much to be learned from everybody, but yeah, you're right. It is kind of one of those uh, life throws things at you, and our natural reactions can go back to what we have typically done to cope with painful or unpleasant, or just, life is tough. Uh, Life is rough.
It can be, but it can also be simple, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it can be easy, but it depends on the conditions that we create around ourselves,
Hmm.
right? And if we are living a valued life, we are going to experience pain and discomfort,
Yeah.
right? But we have the choice how much we decide to suffer over that pain and that discomfort. Kristen Neff, who's a wonderful doctor about self compassion, says pain times resistance equals suffering, right? So
Mm-hmm.
the more we resist that pain, the more we suffer. And that's very, very true with people who use substances, right? Because again, you know, drugs work really good. And opiates, especially, they are the best painkiller that mankind has ever discovered, hands down.
Mm-hmm.
There is nothing better that we know on this planet for pain relief
Of all kinds.
of all kinds, emotional,
Mm-hmm.
physical, right? So it's almost, if you're in pain and you're suffering, and the best solution is to use opiates, then, I ask people, is that a rational decision?
Mm-hmm.
I think it is. If I have a headache and my best solution for that relief is Tylenol, then I'm going
Mm-hmm.
to go to Tylenol, right? I'm not minimizing the devastation or anything like that around, the crisis that we're in. But it's only because I haven't been exposed to a different solution for that pain, right?
Right.
And if I think of myself, if I'm unhoused or I have, a very painful, traumatic life that's, has happened to me, if my best solution for relief is drugs, then I think it makes sense, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And if I'm sleeping on the sidewalk in the cold weather, right, and I can spend $10 to feel warm and comfortable, right?
That seems like a rational decision.
It does. It
Yeah.
does. And it's only rational because the other solutions are not exposed, right?
Yeah.
So maybe for my headache, there's a herbal remedy with, paprika and honey that I could drink that works better, right? Maybe there is. But I haven't been exposed to that.
Right. Yeah. No, that's a great point. That's a really good point. Uh, we clearly know that stopping substances is really not about the substances themselves. The substances are kind of a misguided relief, or as you say, the relief that we know to the core issues, which could be, trauma, could be a variety of things. There's various, states of thought, but I think probably all of us would agree that trauma would be one of the biggest factors that contributes to one's use of substances, although there are others. But really, it's not about, and Dr. Gabor Mate has said this many times. I'm sure you've read and heard him say that it's not about the substances, the drugs. It's about the pain.
Hmm.
So why is it then? Why is it, Jeff, that we find it so hard to get to the root of the problem so that we can just treat the condition and the trauma and stop the drugs or the alcohol or the substance?
That's a great question, and I don't think there's as much as I'd like to offer a simple answer.
You might be very wealthy if you can find it. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly, right. And that's what Gabor says too. He says, don't ask why the addiction, ask why the pain, right? Um, I think because life is busy and everybody is trying to survive, right?
Yeah.
And when we're busy and we're surviving and we're trying to make it one day at a time, we're not afforded that break from life to really reflect and understand, what was the origin to where I've arrived today?
Mm-hmm.
And where do I want to go? Right? Um, when we get overwhelmed by life, and life is incredibly overwhelming these days. Cost of living, all these crises consolidated. When we feel overwhelmed and when we feel busy, when we feel threatened, when we feel unwell, our go-to is to add something. Say, I feel overwhelmed, so I'm going to add this activity to relax more. Or, I feel incredibly stressed, so I'm going to add this event to go have some drinks or be social, right? Or, I'm feeling, despair, so I'm going to add another activity because that will get me out of this, right? And we're
Yeah.
already overwhelmed. So, you know, our reflex is that addition wins over subtraction all the time, right? So if we're overwhelmed, it does make sense. What do we have to subtract from our lives, right? So we can be a bit more grounded. If we're stressed, right? We say, well, I need to do this because it'll take my stress away. Well, why don't you look at what we can subtract
Mm-hmm.
to take your stress away? But it's a societal condition, I think, that we've all are exposed to where, it's more and more and more. And, as I say in the book, I think the fundamental essence behind, the substance use and the condition is that it's a condition of never enough,
Mm-hmm.
right? Whether it be drugs, alcohol, money, validation, achievement, it really is a condition of never enough, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So when we have that break from life and we're able to get grounded and reflect, we can say, most people can say, not all, but most people can say, listen, I'm happy having what I have. And I don't need to be happy having what I want, right?
Yeah, I remember, I'll share something with you, a little bit vulnerable, but I remember having pill bottles, and I had allocated a certain number of pills per day, and I would be counting them to make sure that I had the right amount. And almost every single time, the amount that I had allocated for that period would not ever be enough. And
Yeah.
it was a great plan. And it probably would have worked if someone would have handcuffed me and kept me to that amount. But I just, it was not enough. It just never worked out the way I planned. I'm a person who, I was running a successful business. I had things in order. I was organized. I was dependable. I was on time. It wasn't as though, I was really, not organized in my life. I was very much so, but that part of my life was just, it was never enough. And it is true. And I was get so frustrated because the process of using substances is exhausting and a lot of work, and seeking them and getting them, and the lies and the going and the getting, and it's a lot of work.
Most people I see enter a bed-based treatment program, are there not because of drugs and alcohol, like singular. They are there because life has just been too exhausting and overwhelming, and they surrender. I can't do this anymore. I don't know what I can do. I don't know what there is, but I know I am just tired and exhausted and overwhelmed by living like this.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, in the book, you talk about there not being a, one size fits all standardized process for everyone, which I very much agree with. I once had a GP tell me, I think I said this in an episode a very long time ago. She said to me, if you don't do the 12-step program, you're going to die.
Mm.
And I left crying because I didn't like the 12-step program. I didn't want to do it. And I thought, okay, well, I guess I'm going to die then. I don't want to die. And that was a GP at, I think it was a North Shore walk-in clinic, I don't know, 15 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And any ideas on how we conquer this one way or the highway idea? Because, my concern, and I voiced this before, is that we don't really know, because private recovery centers are not mandated to report. We don't really know what process, what methods, what's going on inside those centers. I attended a private center. It did not work for me. I relapsed within 3 days of leaving. That's just my experience with that private center. But I guess it's a two-pronged question. Is number one, should we not know what's going on inside of all recovery centers in which Canadians are either paying for or publicly going to? And obviously publicly, that access is more readily available. And the other part of the question is, how do we change this one way or the highway method, which can sometimes be really strong on people with the program and the 12-step process?
Absolutely, absolutely. How do we change that? Well, that's a big question, right? It starts with having conversations like this, right? And exposing to the general public and other people that are in the grips of substance use that there is a lot of models, right? But there is no one model or one container to put suffering into. Just like there's no one container to put wellness into, right? We must construct the conditions for somebody to discover their own path. And that really means exposure, right? It means exposure. The only regulations that we have within treatment are very structural models, right? There's no care models, or there's no assessment on models of care and what that care looks like being received, right? The regulations we have are, are the fire exits in the right place? Is there a sign on the door that says this? What is your, psychosocial planning? And I can tell you from experience, the people that are governing these, they're not in the same conversations about what is needed in terms of care. And there's some fantastic places out there. And there's a lot of places, some that I spend time with that have an incredible, incredible standard of care. And these are places you've never known about, right?
Right.
I will say this, though, when somebody enters a treatment program, we only hear about the bad, right? And we don't necessarily hear about the good. So there is a real, there's a tone about, when people are unsuccessful. But there are a lot of people that are successful. And what they do is they move on, they live their best life. And, they kind of, once they leave that behind or close the door on it, but, life is great. They've received what worked for them. I think the disease model and the 12-step model is very familiar to a lot of people, right? It's super familiar. It's been around almost 100 years now, which is crazy.
Right.
What's not familiar is all these other modalities. Like, with health, we look at the biopsychosocial model, right? Or we look at the addiction as an attachment disorder model. And then we have the trauma model, which I think there's been some great pathways in trauma healing. We have different, there's a place I work with in Surrey who have, started the only funded Punjabi speaking program, right, for South Asian men.
Mm-hmm.
We have a lot of Indigenous cultural treatment programs now. So I think we're moving in the right direction, right? But it's about information. And I'm not sure what the conduit for people that don't know or don't have experience, what is that conduit to that information for them, right? I think those are the questions we need to ask. But, the biggest paradox in a recovery journey that I like to talk about is that it's an individual process
Mm-hmm.
that can rarely be done alone, right? So that's where that community, that connection, those cultures come in to those the 12-step model, right? There is an incredible community there that holds really high values, but there's different interpretations about what those values are and what those values mean to somebody, right? I think that's where people get stuck. Um, but if we just take out the values of acceptance and community and helping others, right? Those are very universal in many, many different forms of healing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, also your age and stage of life, right? I mean, when I was looking at the 12-step model as a young 30-something-year-old, I was like, higher power, no thank you. I don't care if you're a tree or God, I don't have anything to do with you. Now, I'm very much a Christian. I lead my family by Christ, and that's my life. So things change in 15 years. Do you know what I mean? So, it's interesting because a lot of biblical stuff talks about, really having to, go through that uncomfortable pain to help grow and, evolve as a wiser and better human being. So it's kind of interesting. The Some of the similarities as I'm reading my Bible every night and thinking about, but and every faith I respect, and I'm sure they all have a lot of great pieces of wisdom that could be added to your recovery journey. But that's just something that I've noticed.
Conditions change, right, Rachel?
They do. Yes, I think that's a really good. I had a question about why you call it the condition, and I think that's a great answer. That it's just, yeah, I like that a lot, because I don't want to be called an addict. I don't want to be labeled that because I'm not defined by that, and
No, but for some people, it adds a really hard layer of vigilance and protection, for them. So
right.
again, individual journey, right?
Yeah. No, fair enough. You discussed the connection between substance use and OCD, which
Yeah,
I thought was really surprising. But then as I read through it, I was really interested. I hadn't seen this connection. Can you speak to that?
yeah, of course. So you know, let me frame this with like the simple theory around cognitive behavioral therapies, right? So we have a thought, translates into a feeling, translates into a behavior. Okay, very simple. Sometimes there's an event that activates that thought. Sometimes the thought just pops in your head. The obsessive compulsive, right? If we look at substance use, is there an obsession there? Absolutely,
Mm-hmm.
right? Is there compulsive behavior present? Clearly there is, because
Mm-hmm.
if participating in an activity or a substance is harming you, the compulsivity is very present. So we look at, the condition of an obsessive compulsive disorder. There's a thought, right? And that thought is fed oxygen, and it grows in that person's head, where they are so occupied with that thought, there's no space to divert thinking. So that thought becomes all consuming to the point of suffering. And the only relief from that thought is to take action on something, right? So, you know, if somebody has a, obsessive compulsive disorder, and their thought is that if they can't open this door and close it 7 times in a row, they're not going to be able to exit the room, right?
Right.
And they play with that thought, and it grows oxygen to the point of the only relief they can get to exterminate that thought is to take action, opening up the door 7 times to find that relief. It's all about relief, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I think there's a really incredible correlation between OCD and a substance use disorder because, you know, the thought about using a substance comes in, right? The feeling says, you know, it could depend on the minute of the day. The feeling could say relief, escape, pleasure, you know, whatever it might be. And then the behavior is to go use the drug or have a drink, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the way, kind of how to manufacture a way out of that is, you know, is some tactics to not feed that thought so much oxygen, because really that's a craving on its own too. We talk about cravings and substance use, right? A craving is just a thought that has been fed a lot of oxygen to, and it's grown, right, to the point that the only relief from that suffocating thought is to go use. So in between the thought and the feeling, there's a belief entwined there.
Mm-hmm.
And how we work on that is we have to examine the old belief and look at a replacement belief, right? Because if we change that belief, the thought can be the same, the event can be the same, but if we change that belief, that will change the feeling and that will change the behavior. So if somebody's active in substance use, their thought is, I need to use, or drugs, whatever it might be. The feeling, escape, relief, pleasure, the behavior, use drugs. We can have that same thought about drugs or vodka or whatever it might be. If the belief is, I'm working on myself, I've been reflecting, I don't think that serves me anymore, I've made a decision to not have that part of my life, I've committed to certain things, I'm doing well, the evidence is my life is improving without it. Well, that feeling is not going to be escape or relief. That feeling is going to be empowerment. That feeling is going to be confidence. That feeling is going to be positive. It's going to be optimistic. And that behavior is not going to be to go pick up a bag, right? That behavior is going to be to continue to reflect. That behavior is going to be, you know, connect with somebody. That behavior is going to be, you know, vulnerability is working for me. I'm going to go join a support. I'm going to go attend my support group, or you know, take some time and hang out with myself.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's a really good um, that's a really good point. And changing one's belief takes time. And as you said, there's a difference between what was it? A difference between easy and simple.
No, what I say is simple does not mean easy.
Right. Simple does not mean
Things
easy.
can be very simple, but it doesn't make them easy.
No, they're not, and it's not easy. No,
Yeah.
but it can be done. And by the way, I'm not dead, and I didn't do the 12-step program.
Yeah.
I'm here. I'm here, and I'm well. And I have
Congratulations.
3 beautiful children. So if you're ever told that, please do not be discouraged. That is a doctor with a very misguided way of thinking and treating a patient. And I'm sorry if that's happening to you, because like Jeff Hayward explains, as much more educated in this space than myself, there is an individual path for each person. I want to just talk about the brain for a few minutes. You write about the brain adapting to substance use. So it kind of becomes its regular normal, as it kind of the brain is kind of rewired in a way, putting it in simple terms. But then the good news is the neuroplasticity of the brain and the fact that it can be changed and rewired. So can you explain?
Yeah, of course. So our entire body is a self-regulating system, right? And I like to explain it like this. If I cut myself, if I cut my arm, right, and I don't attend to it, the body is going to self-regulate, and it's going to clot the blood, it's going to grow skin over that wound, right? And it's going to try and heal itself. Well, the same happens with the brain, okay? if we, the challenge is especially with substances, is that, our brain is lazy too. We're lazy as it is as humans, right? We're lazy people, right? We don't do anything unless there's value to it.
Right.
So if we are introduced, let me back up a second and say that all drugs do is either excite or inhibit certain juices and cells in your brain. That's all they do, right? So people look at, using drugs as adding something. It's not adding anything, right? You're just messing around with what's already there.
Right.
Okay? So, you can't really get addicted to something your body does not already produce. Okay.
Yeah.
So everything is already there, right? All we do is mess with it up and down. And if we mess with it up or down, the brain says, well, this is coming in, these reactions are coming in. So I don't have to organically produce as much as you might need on this, whatever it is, not to get too scientific, right? So the brain normalizes that and said, well, I'm getting this stuff anyway, so I don't have to produce it. That becomes normal. So the production of your neurotransmitters and all the yummy juices in your head, the production is equivalent to what the reaction is coming in, right? So when somebody goes into a withdrawal or a detoxification from substances, those try and go back to where they have been, the normal production without substances. So that means mood is low, people are in despair, energy is just not there at all, right? So it becomes normal. It becomes natural for that brain to be in that place.
Right.
So when people stop using substances, it's actually abnormal and unnatural for their brain to function in that way, right? But I go back to like COVID, right? Everyone said COVID, this is the new normal, right? Remember hearing that all the time. This is the new normal. Well,
Right.
it's only the new normal until it's normal again, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So yeah, the brain is incredible, and it does self-regulate its own healing, but it needs space, it needs time,
Time.
it needs nurture, right?
Yeah. And supportive people around you who understand that.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. Um, you write on page 44, the issue isn't the chemical, it's the mental and emotional bankruptcy you're dealing with. From there, you talk about the dislocation theory and how connection, community, and support. We've just kind of talked about that.
Yeah.
So just really briefly, can you speak to kind of what a significant difference having that connection and that community contributes to someone who's in a process of recovering and healing?
Sure. And I think I can also speak to how it contributes to the process of being unwell as well, also.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Because, we we have we have a lot of conformity in our society, right? And we attach ourselves to different groups depending on likes, values, association, whatever that might be. So we attach ourselves to groups as humans, and if there's a group that is going on, a momentum that's unhealthy, that momentum will carry us too, right? And if we attach ourselves to a group that is moving in a positive and healthy momentum, that momentum will also carry us in that direction as well, right? We, connection is huge. A lot of people in this space talk about connection, right? But when we're feeling connected with others, we're feeling connected to ourselves. When we're feeling disconnected to others, then that amplifies a disconnection with ourselves because we have questions. And we base ourselves off how people see us, right? And that has a lot to do with self-worth. Like self-worth is the messages that we receive from others, how we interpret messages from others, right? That's what we base our self-worth on. So if we're around community that we're receiving positive, validating, healthy messages from, we are going to perceive ourselves, as one of those, as healthy, as positive, as somebody worth validating. And, it's really difficult to find that inner validation for a lot of people.
Mhm.
Most people can't even take a compliment these days. It's very uncomfortable for them, right?
Yeah.
Um, so to be in a place where you can interpret validation from others is really the start that I encourage, and that's where that connection and community comes from.
Yeah, that's interesting. There's a part in your book where you reference Vancouver, and I think it's so incredibly interesting because there's all of these kind of um, these assumptions, I suppose you could say, or reasoning why Vancouver is the place where drug use happens so prevalently. Because we have mild climates, because people tend to get sent here on the Greyhound bus, because it's a port city, whatever it may be. And you talk about Vancouver being the kind of Las Vegas in North America of the 1930s, where many people came from many places, leaving cultures and connection behind. And Vancouver was very new to them, and therefore they were isolated. They were away from what they knew, the culture and connections they knew. And does that then contribute to why the downtown east side and sometimes Vancouver is called the ground zero in Canada for drug use? I'd never heard that connection or that historical reference.
Well, that's a piece from Bruce Alexander, who was a long time psychologist at SFU, brilliant. The creator of the Rat Park experiment, if you've heard of that, and if anybody hasn't heard of that, I really encourage you to look at that experiment. But yeah, that's the response I get, right? Why is Vancouver such a ground zero or a hub? And the answers I receive is that it's a port city, right?
Mm-hmm.
Easy to bring drugs in. The warm climate, like you mentioned, which kind of insinuates that all unhoused people use drugs, which is not the case, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Um, but yeah, so a lot of people don't know this. All the hotels down Hastings were cabarets. They were party spots, right? Because if you look at the 1930s, what was going on in North America, there was this little thing called prohibition in the States, right? Like 10 minutes away from Vancouver. Okay.
Right, right.
So of course, Americans would have complete access to the cabarets, alcohol, and just a great time. And that's how all those cabarets and hotels were developed, right? So there's prohibition, and there was also industry in British Columbia, mining, forestry, all like the gold rush, right? And I'm not
Yeah.
a historian. I don't know when the gold rush is.
Railroad. Yeah.
The railroad, I think the gold rush was happening around there, right? So a lot of individuals from across the world said, hey, this is where I'm going to make my mark, right? This is where there's opportunity for me and my family. So people move from across the world and Canada, right, to come to Vancouver and seek opportunity. But when they did that, they separated themselves from their deep relationships, their cultural practices, the environmental, spiritual familiarity to come to this new city, Vancouver, right? And by doing so, they disconnected, right? And we crave connection, okay? As humans, we want connection. And I'll ask you, Rachel, or ask anybody else, like, who's traveled for work, right? A lot of people travel for work. Go to a brand new city. Maybe they're a little anxious about, the conference they're attending or the presentation they have to give, right? So most people will check into their hotel, and then what's the next stop for them?
Yeah. Yeah. The lobby bar.
The hotel bar,
Yeah.
right? The hotel bar to get some relief from that uncertainty, right?
Right.
Some
Right.
relief from that stressful decision about moving across from wherever. and also to find connection, right?
Mm.
So we see this in individuals coming from very remote Indigenous communities to Vancouver because maybe they have a cousin or an auntie or somebody they grew up with, and they're not satisfied, um, being in the community or the remoteness of where they're living. So it's exciting, right? It's exciting. Come to the big city, but then they meet the friend that they grew up with or their distant cousin, and they might be participating in an unhealthy behavior like substance use, and then that person becomes introduced to it, and then that cycle of conformity continues, right?
I think the hotel lobby bar is a really great example that those who are not perhaps at those kind of deeper stages of substance use can relate to, yet maybe are perhaps if they don't kind of watch that cycle carefully, uh, may want to watch because they could be headed to that if they're looking to that for relief. You never know. Some may not. But it's just an interesting analogy I'd never thought of before. Um, yeah, really interesting. Also on the airplane, you see people ordering, their drinks on the airplane, and that's kind of even in the morning, and you're kind of like, this is kind of strange. It's 10 a.m. and you're having a glass of wine. That's not acceptable anywhere else, but here it's okay.
Yeah,
So
well, alcohol is a great access to feel some sort of freedom too.
yeah.
Freedom from your thoughts, freedom from your responsibilities, freedom in general. And we a lot of the spaces that we live, we do feel smothered and confined with responsibilities and different assignments that we have throughout life.
hmm hmm I just wanted to kind of a couple things to finish off. The first one is kind of this mourning period. I know it well. I'm sure you do. It's this sense of loss when one stops substances, their substance of choice. I
Hmm.
know that sounds really strange to someone who may not have lived experience because why are you mourning the loss of something that was sabotaging your life?
Yeah.
But essentially that was your relief, that was your habit, your ritual, your friend, your whatever it may be. Your I say friend, very um, facetiously. But how does the mourning process affect the healing process? Any thoughts on that?
Well, yeah, we do talk a lot about loss and grief in
Yeah.
counseling, right? Grief and loss, because it's important. Because
hmm
exactly what you said, it is. You know, I really believe that we develop a very intimate relationship with our substances, right? And that intimacy is powerful. The reason it's very powerful is that because you know we I lost my train of thought here.
Intimate relationship with substances is powerful.
Right. The reason why it's intimate is that because we put a lot of trust in it, right?
hmm
It's always there when we want it to be. We become very loyal to it. It's accessible. It never turns its back on us, right? So we create this really intimate connection built on trust. We trust that it's going to be there when we want it. And we also trust that it's going to have the intended effect that we want it to have, right?
Right.
And in a world of uncertainty, it's very predictable. And that predictability is safety to a drug user.
Yeah. No, I remember making a comment to my husband when I was in earlier recovery, saying something along the lines of, I felt a love for my
Hmm. Yeah.
substance. And he thought that was really bizarre and weird. And I said, let me explain why. And it's because, this is something that never let me down. And
Yeah.
there had been so many in my life who had let me down severely.
Yeah.
And that was kind of an understanding point that took some time to connect on.
Yeah.
Um, I wanted to ask you, Jeff, about your book. I recommend everyone pick it up, whether you have lived experience, you're going through the process. looking for answers, or you know somebody who is, I highly recommend it. What do you want people to walk away with after reading your book, and where can they get access to a copy?
What do I want people to walk away with? Um, I want them to walk away with the idea that their story can work for them and their story can be changed. The chapters that somebody has written already, those are there, but they're holding the pen to write the next chapters of their life. And I want it to be helpful and really um, provide a different perspective on healing, substance use. And, there's been a lot of people that have messaged me that, don't have that experience, that have said that a lot of the chapters really help them and they understand them, right? Because it's, it's a formula for living that's constructed individually.
Mhm.
And I want people to understand that it's an individual process, right? And there's many, many different channels and pathways they can take. And most importantly, they can. They can take them and they can heal. And there's
Mhm.
no evidence that says that they cannot.
Mhm.
It's accessible through Amazon, Barnes and Nobles,
Okay.
Apple, ebooks. It'll be on the shelves at Indigo,
Great.
regional here in White Rock, Langley, Surrey in the next couple weeks. Yeah.
Great. Well, I highly recommend the read. As I was reading the book, I was explaining to Jeff that it was the kind of read that you don't want to put down. It's not a difficult read, but it is one that really opens your eyes to some new ideas and ways of thinking that are helpful to both someone in the middle of it, past it, going through it, has someone close to them going through it. Really excellent job on the book. I just really, really enjoyed it, and would highly recommend it as a read. Jeff Hayward, author, facilitator, and accredited counselor. Thank you so much for being here today, Jeff, and for walking through the book, the ideas, and your expertise. It's just so much appreciated and so much needed. And yeah, thank you for your time.
Thank you for having me, Rachel. Be kind and truly connect. You are listening to Rachel Thexton Connects.